might be wondering, what's on my screen right now? So why don't we take a look? To the right here, we have something you might see in your backyard or walking down the street. It's called grass. And to the left here, we have artificial turf. Now, why am I showing you grass and artificial turf? Well, it's because it's becoming a hot topic of debate. Before 1966, almost every field you would see was grass. But now, across the nation, fields are switching to artificial turf. As you can see here from this video, this is me last semester playing for our UB club baseball team, and that was in Cortland, and playing on an artificial turf field. So, what's the controversy about these fields? We first have to look to the NFL. So, many fields league-wide have made the switch to artificial turf, like the Giants here in MetLife Stadium. However, now as these fields have been implemented, and there's been many seasons played on them, there's been a drawback, and it has to do with injury rates, specifically lower extremity injury rates. So in an article published by the NFL's Players Association, their president, former Cleveland Brown, J.C. Tretter, he bashed the NFL's player injury report, specifically mentioning an increase in lower extremity injuries on turf compared to grass. And he called for teams league-wide to switch playing surfaces to grass. And so, J.C. Tretter isn't the only person in this argument. He has backup from a lot of players around the league in the NFL. And so I took these tweets from a Bleacher Report article, and they are screenshots. And so Cooper Kupp here on the left, a star wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams, said that he believes that we and all teams should be playing on grass. This is an age-old issue. I believe it's time to address the problem right now. Gabe Davis, the Buffalo Bills, right here, Buffalo Bills hometown wide receiver, star wide receiver. He said the data is clear, and the NFL agrees film synthetic turf is bad for players. There's a higher injury rate than on grass or any other synthetic surface. And then Nick Bosa, the defensive end for the 49ers, also says the NFL says they care about player safety if they can't put us on a natural surface. So we can clearly see that the players around the league, what they think. They don't like it. They don't like artificial turf. So now, what about the perspective of a team doctor? So in an article from The Athletic, Dr. Tim Kremchick, who's right here to the right next to Joey Votto, first baseman of the Reds, was an orthopedic surgeon for the Cincinnati Reds for 26 years. And he weighed in with his own opinion, and he said that if you go and look at the data is significantly skewed towards using natural grass. He completely, again, just like Tretter, dismisses the NFL's claims that artificial turf is safe. And so now we have input from former players, current players, the NFL, and team doctors like Dr. Tim Kremchick. But what does the data really say? Well, before we go and look at the data, we need to understand what actually causes lower body injuries. So, what causes these injuries? It comes down to three principles that we need a basic understanding of, which we can learn from an article from the InTech Open. And so the three main variables are the coefficient of friction, which pertains to how easy it is for your foot to slip out of the slip on the turf. And then there's the coefficient of release, which is how easy it is for your shoe to actually release from the turf and your spikes to come out of the ground. And high levels of this are associated with more injuries. And then there's also the coefficient of restitution, which is the ability for a playing surface to absorb shock. So when an athlete puts their foot into the ground, how much shock it can absorb, how much shock the turf can absorb. And higher levels of this mean the field can actually absorb more force, which is less injuries. So now that we have a little background, let's actually look at some data. So in an article from Sports Info Solutions, they broke down injury information from the 2017 to 2020 NFL seasons, and they used charts and data to do this. And so we can see here that overall injury rates went up per game, and as well as when players also left the field more per game. But the thing is, we want to focus on lower extremity injuries. This is total injuries. It could be misconstrued for lower body, bring in upper body. So here is the breakdown of all of these injuries for each individual body part. And so if we take a closer look here, we can see that the injuries only to the foot and ankle had an increase when on turf compared to grass. And for the lower legs and knee and the upper legs and hips, the percent change was actually less for turf. So this information from the NFL doesn't really give us precisely, it doesn't tell us precisely whether or not turf increases or decreases injuries. So even if the case was that this data was statistically significant, it's only looked at professional football again, and to truly draw a conclusion, we need to look to other places, not just the NFL. We need to look outside the NFL. And so there was another study done by the American Journal of Sports Medicine that looked at the MLS seasons from 2013 to 2016. And in their studies, the injury rates, again, went up, not statistically significant, but in professional sports, one injury can mean millions of dollars for a certain player. And so, also within the study, they did find, when you break down into the smaller subcategories of different injuries, that Achilles, ankle, and ankle fracture were all found to have a statistically higher incidence rate on artificial turf, which is also very similar to what we found in the NFL study that we just looked at. And so, now that we've looked at two major professional sports in America, however, we've still left out a demographic of athletes. And so what I'm curious about still, what we should be curious about still, is does this increase in injuries carry over to female athletes? So the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine, they conducted a review looking at 7 different ACL injury studies, comparing male and female injury rates on turf and grass, and it was found that females did have a significantly higher risk of ACL injury when playing games. However, men did not. So at this point, it seems as if your gender could play a role in whether or not you're injury prone on turf. And studies for males, from what we've seen so far from the NFL, MLS, and this male-female study, sort of go back up and against each other. They don't really all. We don't have enough data. There's more data that we need. We need more information on this topic. So we are going to go to the American Journal of Sports Medicine, which conducted a review of 53 articles that studied lower extremity injuries, and they were all published between 1972 and 2020. And so from the review, a higher rate of foot and ankle injuries was found on artificial turf, just like the NFL and like the MLS. Both old generation and new generation turf compared with natural grass on both those surfaces was all compared. And the high quality studies, which are level 3 studies that the Sports Medicine Journal declared were of higher quality, all suggested that knee injuries and hip injuries were similar between playing surfaces. However, in elite football, like say the NFL, athletes are more predisposed to those knee injuries on artificial turf compared with natural grass because of the amount of force they put into the ground. But so now, if we take a look deeper into this data, we also know that some studies found injury rates to be higher on grass were actually funded by artificial turf companies. So these studies can really just be washed out as they're confounding with artificial turf companies themselves. And so overall, the information from this article, which already includes previous studies that we've talked about, the MLS, the NFL, the male and female study, they really give us a good reason to see why J.C. Treader and so many current players and other figures around the league are calling for a change for artificial turf.